Today, we're focusing on 7 networking best practices for your next academic conference. Knowing that academic conferences in different disciplines look different, we're going to talk about some general strategies, no matter where you are in your academic program, that you might be able to use going forward. So let's sort of break down, why academic conferences in the first place. My first academic conference was actually an international conference when I was a PhD student. I was in the UK. And it was in Brazil, and it's a giant sort of flight to do, to do a poster presentation. And I was woefully unprepared for every aspect of that: the journey, the travel, the being there, the networking. I didn't have a plan, and I walked away not really appreciating what a conference is or what it was. Right? No one had actually told me any of these things ahead of time. So these are just some of the reasons why you go to a conference. And they're all sort of different, distinct, and they're all equally meaningful to the people who have these, right? Sometimes you just actually want to travel somewhere, and an academic conference is an excuse to do that. Sometimes you have, you're early on in your research and you want people to know what you do. Sometimes you want to learn about other people's research so you can leverage that. All of these are valid goals to have, but they don't all have to be your goals, right? You don't have to achieve all of these things when you go to a conference. And one of the things that you want to be doing is asking yourself, what do I want to do? What do I want to take advantage of in this scenario? Knowing that other people will be there doing their own things, right? And they have their own goals. You can sort of take on board the one that is your priority, or a couple of that are your priority, and then really invest in making those come to fruition, right? And that's going to be a much more manageable set of steps to take than trying to achieve, for example, all of these steps that are right here. So step 1 in our sort of 7 best practices is really figuring out what your goals actually are when it comes to attending a conference. If this was an interactive session, which we're not going to make you do any interactive stuff here, I'd have you sit down and say, well, what do you want out of it? What would be successful for you? Sometimes for me, a successful conference is just making sure that I'm outside of my hotel room engaging with people, even though my introverted self would rather be in that hotel room for the entire time. That's a goal that I might have, because obviously that's the reason to be at the conference, to have some of these conversations that are going on. Here are just some general ideas, things that you can sort of be thinking about as reasonable goals for a conference that are sort of part of a broader, your broader professional or career development, right? And one of the biggest aspects of a conference is to sort of promote your own work, to be your own marketer and advocate, and be able to say to people, look, I'm doing this really interesting project. Every one of you is doing interesting work, unique work, right? It's not being done by, in the exact same way by different people out there. So you all have something really interesting to share, and your goal is to sort of promote that, because no one's going to promote your work better than you do. No one's going to be more excited by it than you are, right? So that's a good goal to have. Sometimes conferences are really about learning new things, learning new systems, new projects, new topics. Oftentimes there are professional development opportunities built into conferences by professional scholarly associations, and you can learn lots of different things, a technology, a tool, or even about different careers that are out there. That's a great goal to have too. The introducing yourself is sort of part of all this, right? It's easy to promote your work to people when there are people that you can promote it to. And so, being able to sort of start a conversation and meet new people is great. Being able to do that more strategically and meeting the right people that will be helpful for you is obviously a sort of a more advanced goal that we'll touch on in just a second. What I love to do at conferences and social settings especially is help people connect to other people, right? I may intersect in a conference with lots of different people and go, oh, that's all very interesting. It doesn't really influence me. It doesn't, what you're doing is interesting, but not necessarily relevant. But then I'll find someone who doesn't know this other person who would find that relevant. And, it brings me great joy to connect people together who may not have found each other on their own. And that's another part of networking, right? Networking is for your benefits, in many cases, to achieve some of your goals. But it's also, a mutually beneficial experience where you can help other people. And by doing that, you're actually going to be promoting your goals as well, or achieving some of your goals as well. So helping other people make connections, especially other people who may have a harder time integrating into conversations or meeting new people because they are, because of many reasons, right? They may just not come from an institution where they have a lot of networks to rely on. They may be first-gen students at a conference, like I was in my Brazil conference, who need someone to, or be beneficial or benefited from having someone guide them through this process. Promoting the work of your peers and other researchers is a wonderful way of really sort of integrating yourself into an effective networking situation. So yes, you are there to promote yourself, but being able to promote the work of others is fantastic. There's not an awful lot of positive reward, reinforcement or reward built into the academic setting, right? There's a lot of criticism about the work that you're doing. I'm going to give you criticism on your work and tell you what you could do differently or better. Anytime that we can promote the idea of just positively reinforcing people and being positive about their work and sharing that is going to be a wonderful change to the sort of system that we're all part of. These may not be your goals, these are just ideas, but this is the kind of way I want you to be thinking about the conference, is that you can break down what is sometimes a stressful event and you're doing work or you're presenting a poster. You can also break down some of these specific goals that are going to be helpful to you. A quick talk about introverts and extroverts. So as I already mentioned, I'm someone who has introverted tendencies. So unless someone's, in many cases making me go to a conference, I'm not going to sort of necessarily have internal motivation to say, yes, I definitely want to do that. Obviously, I will do that. The key thing about people with introverted tendencies is making sure that you have key questions that you want answers to, because that helps guide all the conversations that you can have. You're thinking strategically about it. Introverts tend to be very strategic in the way that they think. Once you've found the answers to those questions, you can then reward yourself by not being part of that social setting or whatever that looks like. You can go reward yourself by binge watching TV in a hotel room for 2 hours. Making sure that you have goals is going to make sure that your social battery doesn't get drained very quickly, right? You walk into a room with lots of people chatting, it's an immediate drain on your social battery. Extroverts, introverts are oftentimes very jealous that extroverts can walk into a room, people with extroverted tendencies walk into a room and feel comfortable or look comfortable, but just having lots of conversations without having goals in mind isn't actually any more beneficial than having no conversations, right? Because you can have lots of great conversations but not actually take away tangible, actionable items that you can then leverage as part of your professional career development. So even people with extroverted tendencies need to have a goal and a plan to keep them on track, and so that they're not distracted by the sheer joy of meeting all these new people that are out there. And so as you think about more specific questions that you have, these are just, again, more ideas that you might be thinking about, right? So you're trying to publish your first book. You want to know who's made contacts with publishers and who's a good contact person for that. You might be starting a new project and you might be looking for collaborators in some way. You might be looking for funding, and maybe there are people out there who have funding and you can ask them about their experiences. So a myriad of questions that you could ask, depending on where you are in this whole process. And then the next question really is, well, who has answers to those questions that I can find, right? This becomes the more targeted, strategic approach to making sure that you are talking to the right people. So then there's a lot of pre-conference work that happens before you even step foot in the conference environment that's going to make this a more effective process. So in many cases these days, especially because we're moving out from our virtual settings, most conferences will have some sort of app that's connected with it. So it's an app that will share the schedule. It's a social opportunity for people to connect. So you can put your profile up there. And you do want to invest some time in making sure that the conference app version of you, that profile is updated. You can leverage a lot of what you've done for your own LinkedIn profile and sort of integrate that across. But you want people to find you. You want people to know about what it is that you do. You want people to have clear takeaways about the research that you're doing or the things that you're looking for, and you can build that all into your profiles on the app. And then you also want to make sure your LinkedIn profile is updated too, because people will find you on one platform and they'll look for you on another platform, and you want to be sort of coherent in your narrative across these different platforms. On the other side, you want to be looking for obviously what the sessions are that you can go to, but who's at those sessions? Who might you be able to connect with? Who's presenting a poster or a presentation that gives you an excuse to get some of your questions answered, or makes a connection that's going to be beneficial to you. So looking at the sessions, planning out your sessions, but then looking at the people involved in that and saying, can this person help me answer some of the questions that I know that I have? And then you can do some outreach ahead of time to make sure that you're sort of making that come to life, right? You can sort of say to people, hey, I see that you're coming to the conference, right? So this is a great sort of pre-step that's going to make your conference experience better, because you'll have done some of the harder work, the randomly introducing yourself to people ahead of time. I just went to the first conference that I could think of, and it was the American Society for Cell Biology. I somehow get emails from them. They have a cell bio conference every year. I think it's in DC this year. So I went to their page. I just scrolled down their page and they had these member profiles. And I wondered to myself, do I know these people, right? These are just random people that came up. So Alyssa was the first person. I went on to LinkedIn. I found Alyssa's profile here. Immediately, I see that she's a secondary connection. So although I'm not connected on LinkedIn to her, I know, in this case, 2 people who are. And if I look at her profile, I can see that that's Kate and that's Paula. And so if I wanted to reach out to Alyssa ahead of time, I could leverage my connections potentially to do that, right? I could ask Kate if she knows Alyssa well, she could introduce me, and so on. I went back to this one. Turns out I didn't know Jeff, so I didn't get 3 out of 3, but Valerie seemed familiar. So I looked at her profile, and lo and behold, she was a postdoc at Penn who left in 2020. I probably had an appointment with her at some point as well. So, a little bit of research, you can find out how you're connected to people that might be helpful to you. So what would I say to Alyssa, for example, if I were reaching out? This is just an example of, an outreach email that I might write. See that you're presenting at this conference. If she were very interested in your paper, I'm doing something similar. I'd love to get your thoughts on, some of the challenges that we're facing on that. Could we chat? And then, looking for an opportunity to make that come to life. Are you going to be at the opening session? Are you going to be at the poster session? And then here I sort of name drop Kate in it as well, just to make sure that she knew that we are connected in some way, but also to ask a sort of a less heavy question. The first one is slightly heavy about research. The next one is sort of a lighter, hey, do you know if Kate's going to be at the conference too? And maybe I know that Kate is going to be at the conference, but it doesn't matter, I can still ask. So, I mean, this was a much more specific ask in terms of, I have research problems. You can be more general about it. I'm just looking forward to meeting you and hearing more about your research. But it's an example of what a little bit of pre-work can do, because then if Alyssa does reach out, then you can organize. I'd love to meet you at the poster session. I'll look for you at that point in time. And then it's not a surprise to her when you do reach out and have a conversation. Now, other things that you can do to sort of leverage your network right now is make sure that you're talking with your PI or your advisor, seeing who they know is going to be at the conference, seeing if they can help you start a conversation. Sometimes your PI and advisor are going to the same conference and they have lunch with people, or they're going to meetings, asking if you can join them for that meeting, if that's appropriate. That might be a great way of meeting new connections as part of that. When I worked at Disney, outside of an academic conference, but we had similarly had professional conferences, my boss was really great at taking me along and introducing to meet people at the meetings that she was at. And that was really valuable experience. Not every advisor is going to do that, but you can certainly ask. And then don't forget, former lab mates or people in your department who are now at other institutions, academic institutions. They may know people at their institutions who you can, be introduced to during the academic conference. So lots of things that you can sort of leverage by just thinking about your current network right now. Then you have to sort of get ready to sort of introduce yourself to different people in different contexts. And this might sort of overlap with the idea of an elevator pitch, but in many cases, you don't need an elevator pitch. You just need a way to break the ice, to start a conversation, right? And so remembering that even though you're wearing a name badge, the majority of time that people are wearing name badges, it's flipped the other way around and no one can see your name or your institution. So don't assume that anyone remembers you or knows you. I have very sort of specific facial recognition. If I met you in my office and you come back to my office, I'll remember you. If I meet you in a conference, my brain has a hard time remembering exactly who you are or where you are. So, introducing yourself to everyone is always a best practice. And it doesn't have to be hard, right? Your name, what you're studying. In this case, relate yourself to the person or say something nice about them. Hey, I really enjoyed your presentation earlier. Or, hey, I saw your paper the other day and that was great, right? So something that is positive. And then something to keep the conversation going, because in most cases, you don't need a 2-minute elevator pitch that tells someone everything about you. You're just trying to start a conversation where in many cases you'll share the same information, but in a more interactive kind of way. So, as an example, hello, I'm a PhD candidate in neuroscience. I'm studying this. I really enjoyed your presentation yesterday. I see that you're working in Alzheimer's in drug discovery. I'd love to hear more about your work on the clinical trial stage. Again, that's sort of what you would like to get. And then to start the conversation, an easy question, hey, what session are you going to next, right? Because that's an easy question to answer, but it gives you an opportunity to keep that conversation going, gives them an opportunity to be part of that conversation as well. So a short introduction where you've practiced saying your name out loud, especially, making sure that people can pronounce your name correctly. We've talked about that in sort of your the LinkedIn profile, how to record that and put that on your LinkedIn profile, but just making sure that you give your name slowly and clearly so that people can say your name and recognize your name is a key part of any effective introduction. And then obviously remembering their name and making sure that you're pronouncing that correctly is also valuable. There is a session on our YouTube channel on elevator pitches. Again, I'll put the links in the chat to where you can find those videos on YouTube if you want to take a look at that. It's just a longer overview of sort of elevator pitches in general and introductions in general, in case you want to explore that. LinkedIn has lots of information on elevator pitches, right? So again, introductions and elevator pitches, not quite the same thing, but there's a lot of overlap between them. So do take advantage of LinkedIn Learning. Remember, you have access to that whilst you're a student or a postdoc, and you'll lose that once you graduate. So there's a whole bunch of free resources on any aspect of professional development that you can find on LinkedIn. Introducing yourself is one part. Starting a conversation, even with people that you already know, is another part, right? So beginning those conversations is going to be important. These are just sort of examples of how you can sort of break into a conversation or start a conversation with someone you don't yet know, who's just sitting there, minding their own business, or wishing someone that would come in and talk to them, or whatever the scenario is. Again, you want your own sort of list of things that you can say, you feel comfortable saying, and that you've practiced saying out loud. And then it all seems very natural to you when you're in these environments to leverage some of these opening lines. As I mentioned, the one I often rely on is, hey, have we met before? Because chances are we have, and I've totally forgotten either their name or their face. And it's just helpful to, so that I don't make any assumptions that we have or have not to start that conversation. Starting conversation is one side. Leaving a conversation is also another aspect, right? So you're in a social setting, the networking event, the opening session, and you're sort of stuck in a group, or you feel stuck in a group, or you want to do other things. It's totally okay to sort of say, I've got other things to do, and it's been great chatting with you. Again, you just have to practice it. You don't have to be stuck in there. Sometimes you want to connect someone to someone else so that they're not left alone either, right? So it's a bit of a strategic social engagement where you're saying, hey, have you met this person? And then off you go and do something else. But again, these are just things to remind you that you're there for, some strategic reasons. And if you need to have a conversation with someone else, it's not worth being stuck in a group and not having that conversation when you can be out there starting a new one. So starting a conversation, leaving a conversation, all good things to practice. Another great best practice is to make sure, obviously, that you're asking questions in the different sessions that you're going to. If these are presentations, there's a lot of sort of hierarchy, I suppose, involved in who gets to ask questions and what that looks like. But where you do get to, for smaller panel discussions or presentations, it's always fantastic to be able to ask a question. First of all, it forces you to pay attention rather than check your phone or doodle around or do other things. Secondly, it allows you to sort of introduce yourself to a broad range of people, because as you're asking the question, you can also tell people who you are, right? So that gives the person that you're asking some context, but all those people sitting around you are going to get a sense of who that is as well. Speakers would rather have people ask questions, especially good and positive questions, than not. So it helps them feel engaged. So it's doing a favor for them. And if you have a question, chances are everyone else will have a question too, right? So it's an opportunity for people to get an answer that they wanted, they just didn't ask that question. So the way that I would frame, asking a question as an event is again, a very strategic one where, if you have a question and whatever the system is, you walk up to the microphone, they give you a microphone, but stand up so that everyone can see you, and then introduce yourself. Don't jump straight into the question, because people would like a bit of context as to who's asking this question. Hi, I'm Joseph Barber. I'm a postdoc at University of Pennsylvania, right? It's really all you need to do. You don't need to go into details about your own research. That provides enough context, but then the 10 people or 200 people in the room now know that you exist as an entity and have a name and have a face, right? And they can connect that thought with you. Then go ahead and ask your question. Now, the added benefit of asking a question is that it gives you an excuse to follow up with the speaker afterwards, right? Maybe there's a Q&A session or a general mixer, or they're just in the conference for the rest of the time. And you can find them and can say, hey, I was the person who, I'm Joseph Barber from Penn. I was the person who reached out about, ask you about this question. Thank you so much for your answer. I find it really helpful, and I've been given a lot of thought. Something I want to think about in terms of my own research. And then you're reminding them who you are. You're having a second connection with them. You're building this relationship with them over time, and you're valuing them as a presenter of this topic area. And then you can potentially ask more questions or follow up after the conference again, saying, I really enjoyed your presentation. This is the way that you build professional relationships, right? Sort of small engagements over time that are all positive and demonstrate that you're proactive and interested. So this is just asking the question at an event, and it's so helpful in terms of positioning yourself and introducing yourself to a broader range of people without actually having to have a conversation with those people. Poster sessions don't happen at all conferences, but they certainly happen at some conferences. They're great simply because people are stuck at their poster for a couple of hours, depending on what the setup is, right? They can't actually run away from you. So in terms of networking, it makes it much easier, because if they're static in place, you can come to them and interact with them. Not only can you look at poster presentations and learn about what they're doing, but you can also, if they're not busy answering questions for other people, you can ask them about their institution. You can ask them about their PI. Maybe you're a PhD student and want to be a postdoc at their institution, or interested in their lab. You can get some behind the scenes information that's going to be helpful for your decision making moving forward. You can ask about their funding, their collaborators, so many questions that you can get from a person. And again, standing at a poster with no one talking to you is not a fun experience. You want people to engage and you want them to be positive too. So giving them positive feedback about how you enjoy their research, or it's a great poster, whatever that looks like, that's going to be effective. Now, so an added layer to this is helping them promote their work. So if you really enjoy their research, you have an opportunity to promote that work to your audience, to your network. What does that look like? Well, it could look like lots of things, right? So here are just examples from LinkedIn that I pulled of people sharing them, presenting their posters at a conference. Obviously, in order to do this, they need someone to take a photo of them. So, you could ask someone, hey, have you shared this on LinkedIn? This is fantastic. And they're like, no. And then you could say, hey, I could take a photo, and then you could post this, right? So you could be good about that. You could even take a photo of them and say, I was at this conference and this is great research that's out there. I think this goes back to this idea of building positive connections and promoting positive attitudes around research and being a sort of a changing force in academia to sort of go from critical feedback to sort of positive feedback. So you can do this for your own sessions and should do this out there so people can see your work, but helping other people promote their work, I think, is a wonderful way of engaging and networking in subtle ways. This is something I touched on pre-pandemic, which is sort of equally important post-pandemic, but it comes down to a single sort of somewhat made-up statistic. Where are you most likely to meet people at a conference that you really want to meet? And in terms of experiences that people have shared, it's typically not where you think you're going to meet them at the networking events. It's when you're stepping out of the bathroom, because everyone's going to intersect with the bathroom at some point, and then you bump into them. And yes, everyone's going to wash their hands because of pandemic stuff and everything else. And then you're going to dry your hands, but it's going to be one of those fans that takes forever. And you're like, I got to get back to the conference. And you're going to walk out of the bathroom and your hands are somewhat moist and someone's going to bump into you, go, hey, and then I want to shake your hand. You're like, don't shake my hand, it's wet. And then, all sorts of thoughts go into people's heads. So it's a very simple best practice, but completely and totally dry your hands before you leave the bathroom. You will feel much more comfortable meeting people right outside, which is very likely to happen. So that's an easy best practice to sort of take on board there. And then finally, post-conference follow-up, right? Sort of the goal here is to sort of do a lot of work and then make sure that you are following up afterwards, that you can act on some of the things that you've learned, some of the people that you've met, some of the knowledge that you've gained, right? And that could look like a whole bunch of different things, but basically it could be reaching out and, thanking people just for presenting, or that you enjoyed meeting them. It can mean adding them to your network, right? Can I connect with you on LinkedIn is a great sort of follow-up step that can keep the conversation going. You don't want to automatically assume that you can, although in most cases you can, but it's just an excuse to keep the conversation going. It may be an opportunity for you to have an additional conversation, right? You might want to learn about the role that they've taken and have more of what we call these informational interviews, right? So a 15 to 30 minute chat online or in a different scenario where you can ask them about their own life experience navigating through different parts of their professional career. If you're interested in faculty careers, you might want to ask about what that looked like and how they've navigated some of those challenges, or if they've are working in industry, you can ask them a different set of questions. So these informational interviews don't necessarily happen in a conference because there's a lot of moving parts and there's not necessarily 30 minutes of time for you to have a single conversation with someone necessarily. But after a conference, having met someone and knowing that they're valuable, you can certainly then continue those conversations. And that may be one of your follow-up approaches that you take. Okay, a couple of resources that I want to wrap up with. On the PhD career training platform by Beyond the Professoriate, they have a how to build and grow your network video. It sort of touches on what we're doing here, just strategies for interacting with people and making it a strategic approach. So again, you can take a look at that video in your own time. They also had a panel discussion on building relationships during your PhDs and postdoc. Certainly, if you have questions about navigating conferences, you can always schedule an appointment with us. We're more than happy to chat with you and give you some sort of best practices around that, or walk you through your strategy. That's definitely something that we can help you with as conference season comes and goes.